A murder is committed. Prosecutors push for the death penalty. Some people say no. Well, one of them is here today. Hello, welcome to Wordnet. I'm your host, Jack Knight. My guest today is Ann Vincent, a former Catholic nun whose brother was murdered in 1882. Thank you, Ann, for coming here. 19. Oh, that would make you pretty old, 1982. She's been an advocate for the abolition of the death penalty for almost her whole life. And do you want to talk about the circumstances after your brother was murdered?
Okay. He was murdered in Florida, which is a death penalty state. But he lived in Ohio. He was down there on business. And my father and I went to Sunday Mass. He was going to be waked on a Sunday afternoon, so my father and I went to Sunday Mass. And you know, we say the Our Father, and you know, we're just used to going through there. And all of a sudden, some words stuck out in my mind in a way they hadn't before. Forgive us as we forgive. And so that hit me right away, that whoever killed my brother, got to forgive, because as we forgive, right? And so I'll just let it at that. But anyway.
Were there other people in your family, siblings or relatives, that say this guy should die?
Well, it took the police quite a while to find the man who did it. And I know my two younger brothers, they're kind of supporters for the death penalty, although they never really got into, yeah, that should happen. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he was put in prison for life, that sufficed.
So that was enough for you. As a matter of fact, I think you wrote a letter to the newspapers and you said that.
Yes.
Having him in prison for life is enough for me. And in fact, he did die in prison?
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
What was your feeling after that? He's gone. He's paid his price.
I wished him no ill. And so I don't know what happened to him while he was in prison, but I hope that he somehow made peace with his life and what he did, and I let it go at that. I mean, I just can't go around harboring hatred. I mean, forgiveness is really for the person who forgives, I think, more than the person who is forgiven.
Yeah.
And I sometimes come across folks who, yeah, I'd like to throw the switch on the electric chair, or I'd like to do this. I think, what does that do to a person who keeps harboring and it just seems to me that it diminishes our own life to want to, and the other thing is, when I hear people say, yeah, we ought to execute them, do we ever think about the people who are state employees who have to do that? What happens to them if they have to insert a needle, or if they have to put somebody in an electric chair, or if they, in Utah, have to shoot somebody? Do we ever think about the impact on the folks who have to carry out the sentence?
There's information that you commented on in a letter to the papers, that to keep a criminal, an egregious criminal, alive in prison for life is far, far less expensive than execution.
That's right.
And why would that be?
Oh, because people who are in death row, they're often in a solitary confinement, basically, individual cells. They have none of the prerogatives of being out in the general population. So the general population, the costs are several $100,000 a year, whereas for somebody who is on death row, it's 1.3 million by and large in California. I'm not quite sure what the statistic is now, but I think that's pretty close to it. It's over $1 million a year. You need more guards. They have to be better trained. They have special equipment. I mean, it can be a very stressful place. And to put yourself in the place of somebody who's in these prisons, knowing that they want to kill me, even though I killed somebody. Or maybe they didn't kill somebody. And as we know, because there have, through the Innocence Project, dozens and dozens of people in this country have been released from prison because the evidence showed they did not commit the crime for which
and
they
I
were
suppose,
supposed.
and it has happened, that people have been executed for a crime they didn't commit, and later on they found out who really did it.
Yeah, and you can't say, oops, sorry. You know, or even young people. I mean, I dealt with teenagers who were locked up. I taught at the California Youth Authority. I often substituted at Riverside Juvenile Hall or Southwest Juvenile Hall in Riverside County. Kids, I mean, I don't know what they use for brains sometimes, right? But, you know, Florida executed a 14-year-old a number of years ago. 14. I was a freshman in high school at 14. And I know right from wrong, but you know, kids do stupid things, which is one reason why now you can't put kids in prison for life or can't execute them, or those whose cognitive abilities are severely limited. We've also executed people who are mentally handicapped, you know, I mean, whose IQ is really 70 or below.
Yes.
And they don't really understand.
I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from one side of the argument that these people are terrible people, they did terrible things, they don't deserve to live. And yet, as Christians, we all the way back down to the lowest point, turn the other cheek. We have an obligation to protect, in one sense, what God has put on the earth. You, in one of your letters to the editors, you talked about Supreme Court Justice Jackson, who was against the death penalty. And this is back in the 30s, 40s?
Well, we had another one, I just blank right now, who retired from the Supreme Court about 15 years ago, and he said he just wasn't going to be part of that mechanism anymore of killing people.
Yeah. When you were working, and this is from teenage, you were interested in involvement in this anti-death penalty.
Well, in one sense, yes, because I was quite young, maybe 10 or 11, when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed. And I just remember I felt a certain stress about that. My parents got the newspaper every day. I was cognizant of what they were accused of. I lived in New Jersey. They were up in Sing Sing, New York. I mean, you just go up the Hudson River, you know, to that penitentiary. And so I was aware that what they did was very serious, but something deep inside said to me, this is not right. You don't kill people. And they, in those days, the electric chair. Now, I don't remember which one was which, but I remember one of them, it took three jolts of the of electricity to kill one, and 5 of the other. I mean, I was just astounded, even as a youngster, realizing that this is what was happening to somebody. I'll tell you something that my parents don't even know. When I was a kid, you know how you unscrew light bulbs?
Yes.
Right? I just wanted to know what it was like, to
stick your finger in
a
the
socket. I found out. So imagine being electrocuted. I mean, I got a little shock, right? But imagine being no, so my parents didn't know that. I mean, actually, this is the first time I've talked about it, but, you know, that's another issue.
Well, I recall my parents telling me that as a child I had my picture taken in a little kind of a short-legged sailor suit. And as I was scooting around the floor, I had wet myself and my pants were soaked, and I scooted by an electrical outlet and I got zapped. And I thought to myself at that time, oh, what is that all about? And then later on in retrospect, I think about electrocution. Mm-hmm. And I've worked as a handyman for a long time. So there's a lot of pliers that had that burn spot on it, and screwdrivers and so forth, and the little tingles that I got. It's kind of overwhelming to think about having that plate on your head and your hands tied down and knowing this is it and not knowing what to expect and all of that. How old were you when you went into religious life?
20.
And as you got into this work against the death penalty, how did that affect your work within the community?
Well, the community was very supportive. I mean, one of the, certainly the focus, Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, was peace through justice. So justice has always been an issue, and that certainly is one that was being addressed even in the 1980s.
There are references in the Bible, and we talked about this earlier, an eye for an eye, and thou shalt not kill. And you want to comment on what you're feeling about the real meaning behind that is?
Yes, because historically it was not uncommon for someone to be killed because he took maybe somebody's eye or a tooth or a goat or something. So these are not proportional. So the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is to bring about proportion in terms of punishment for what was done. Makes sense to me.
A little bit. And of course, it's right there in one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, or
Murder.
murder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on the translation.
I imagine that when I talk to people about biblical references, they say, oh yeah, well, that's King James. He just got the best literary guys and say, okay, rewrite this for me so it sounds good. And I don't think the argument will ever end as to what it really was, what it should be. How do you translate this from Arabic to French, German, then into English, and from the Latin? Who's telling the truth here, or who's doing that for their own particular purpose? When your brother passed and you started getting involved, did you get any resistance from your community or friends or people who had the other view?
Not so much from community, but rather when I was asked to give talks. Sometimes the anti-abortion people would come up and they'd say, yeah, but you know, abortion, that's innocent life. It's life. There was a disconnect to me for the anti-abortion people. It's part of a broader, consistent ethic of life.
Right.
Something that I would say, by the way, that I advocated long before Cardinal Bernardin.
We'll be
Break
back
time.
with Mary Ann Vincent in just a moment to talk more about no death penalty.
In life, we are not alone. We live with and among people. We constantly enter into contact and relationship with others. Some of these relationships are very formal and superficial, but some are very deep and intimate. How do relationships work? We can all easily relate with those relationships that have been wounded, which are sometimes even bleeding. Father Martin Padovani, SVD, has written a book called Healing Wounded Relationships. It is the result of his many years of work as a marriage counselor. He deals with some of the very simple but pertinent topics like communications, listening, intimacy, forgiveness, reconciliation, and dealing with anxiety and fear. And of course, a very practical question: how do you make a marriage work? You will surely be enriched by this book. You should get it for yourself, or maybe get a copy for a relative or a friend. Be blessed by this book and improve your relationships.
Call the number on the screen or email us to get your copy. You can also place your order by visiting our website. Do it today.
We're back with former nun, Catholic nun, Mary Ann Vincent, who has been an advocate for the abolition of the death penalty for almost all her life. You were a teacher while you were in the community,
Yes.
and afterwards you taught in parochial schools, and then you went to teach juveniles incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? What was your feeling of what you might be able to accomplish in that role?
Well, kids are young, and they're still, what do you want to say, malleable. You know, to make changes. And I think that although some people might be ready to hurl darts at them, somebody's got to be able to deal with them as persons and not judgmental. You know, I mean, I had kids who, as a matter of fact, a kid who was in for attempted murder tripped me, broke and dislocated my bones. I still can't make a fist with this hand. But they're kids. I mean, this kid was about 15, right? And he was going to leave the youth authority at one point and then be sent off to prison, I think until he was about 25 because of what he did in San Diego. But you can't just keep harboring malice, if I can put it that way. But I like dealing with those kind of kids because sometimes after they were incarcerated for a while, they started seeing things differently. I wish I hadn't done this. Wish I hadn't stolen that car. Wish I hadn't broken into the house. Wish I had done that, you know, whatever. And so because of the environment, it was a chance to really just talk to the kids. And sometimes I would go over to the unit, or I'd walk when they were going from the classroom back to their unit. Sometimes I would walk outside with them and continue a conversation with somebody. Did it make a difference? I have no idea. But, well, in some ways, I guess it does, because I remember one time then I went to another youth authority facility, and I was walking down the road, and a couple kids jumped up out of their seat, and one called out, "Miss Vincent! Miss Vincent!" I had him in Norwalk, and he was over in a different facility. Yeah, and they wait. So maybe it doesn't make a difference. I don't know, but you know, we do what we can do.
Can you think of any outstanding situation where somebody that you dealt with eventually left the system and had a significant life after that?
Well, the thing is, we don't have contact with a lot of these kids after. We're not supposed to. Although one day I was out for a walk. I live in Corona. I was out for a walk one day, and I saw this boy kind of young man walking towards me. And I thought, he looks familiar. "Miss Vincent, how are you? I'm so-and-so. How are you doing?" "Good. Have you gone back to school?" "Oh, yes. And now I have a baby, and I'm really happy, and I'm doing well."
Must be a great thrill.
It is. I mean, it's nice to know that the kids have made a change, right? And some of the kids, they come back and back and back, and a lot of that has to do with their home life, obviously. Gangbangers,
Yeah.
right? And they don't expect to live to be 21, some of them, which is kind of frightening, I think. But, you know, we do what we can do, and I think kindness goes a long way if we can muster it.
I wonder how much generational stuff has sort of directed the minds of people our age. When I was a kid, black people were called other things. And I even remember my dad. He never said the N-word. It was always another word: spook, spade. And the groundskeeper at the park in which our house was actually inside a city park. He used to push me on the swing. His name was Rab, and he had very, very dark skin. And I questioned my father about it. And he said, "Well, there's 3 kinds of black people. They're brown, they're black, and they're African," with the emphasis on the African, meaning very dark. I lived in a town where juvenile delinquency, I rarely heard about that. In my schools that I went to, rarely was there, except for one in 7th grade. He ended up in prison for rape. But there was very, very little of that I had come in contact to. And my sensibility growing up was that because the black people were kept in this particular mini ghetto, Cameron Avenue and Cameron Place. That's the only place where there were African Americans in my town of 100,000 people. And in the high school of 2,000, there were maybe 10. And my relationship was mostly with the athletes or the entertainers. Well, it wasn't hard, 10 people. So what do you do to try to change those attitudes about minorities that you are suspicious of, that's been inbred, Don't hang out with these people. Don't go over to that neighborhood. What can we do?
I don't have an answer to that. But I, like you, I mean, I did not know about juvenile delinquency. I mean, I grew up in a town where everybody had two parents, and the moms were all stay-at-home moms because that was a different time period. What I found was that a lot of the kids that I have dealt with, there were no fathers. I would say 3/4 of the boys at the Youth Authority didn't have fathers who were involved in their life. They were either in prison, jail, parted ways with the mother, had very little contact with the boys. And I think that was part of it, that these boys did not have good role models, or didn't have a father, because a woman cannot be mother and father. When I hear that, boys need men as role models.
Wait till your father gets home.
Well, that's a different story, isn't it? Yeah.
I've heard that more than once. And my
Like the
dad was the kind of
disciplinary.
guy, it's black or it's white, it's right or it's wrong. When I found $2 in the couch cushions, I took my friends to the 5 and 10, it was around Halloween, and I got them skeleton masks, and we took the bus, which was a nickel, and spent the $2. And my father saw one of the things I had bought, and he said, "Where'd you get that?" He said, "I found money in the couch, and I took the guys down to the 5 and 10. Was that your $2? No. I could have bought you a pair of shoes with that $2. So it was a lesson right there. And I think he was heavy-handed, but it stood me pretty well till this time. That thing about single parenting, no fathers, I don't know if we'll ever get by that. There seems to be a...
Well, one of the things I did deal with the boys at the Youth Authority, because I had more time, was, do you know the movie Gandhi?
Yes, of
Okay,
course.
there was a scene there where a lot of the Indians, the men were all dressed in white, and they marched up, because this was a nonviolent action. They marched up because they were protesting the British and salt tax and so forth, and they were beaten with what looked like a baseball bat that had nails in it, and they just crumpled to the ground, and then the women carried them off, bloodied, right? And they offered no resistance at all. And there was an English reporter who took note of all of this, and that was part of the change that took place in Great Britain, because this man was thoroughly embarrassed that the English were responsible for such brutality, because they had a different vision of themselves. And so I would show this part of the movie, not the whole movie Gandhi, but show this part, that nonviolence has a place in our life, and that it takes a strong person to be anybody can be violent, but it takes a strong person to just stand there and take it and not retaliate in kind. Now, whether this made any difference or not to these boys, I don't know, but I wanted them to see that there are other things in life than what they were experiencing.
I know that I had an altercation with a boy. I had to be in my early teens, probably around 9th, 10th grade. I was coming out of the movie theater, and he and two of his friends accosted me, and he accused me of something that I had no idea what he was talking about. And he was going to fight me right there on the sidewalk. And for some reason, something I said diffused it. It never happened. Although I know I could lick him. And maybe not the other two guys who would jump in. But through my lifetime, I have said, kill the B word. And now I realize, in the same sense that you do, that that's not going to change much. Give people the death penalty, statistically, it doesn't change a thing.
Right. Jack, well, the other thing is that tomorrow there's going to be a huge nonviolent demonstration in support of climate change legislation, right, to change climate change. And I'm really pleased to see that so many young people realize this is the planet we are inheriting. So we're talking about the death penalty, which is just part of a pro-life or consistent ethic
Yeah.
of life stance. But all of these isolated or discrete issues of abortion, euthanasia, death penalty pale in comparison to what would happen to this planet if we continue to pollute the air, pollute the water.
Yeah, so
more
our-
things become extinct. It seems to me we need to start looking at a broader perspective.
Our attention has to be beyond what is comfortable for us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think I have enjoyed a program as much as I have today. Maybe it is because
We're both Irish and Catholic, right? Or
Oh,
something.
well, and from Boston, that's a redundancy.
Yes.
You know, you're Boston Irish Catholic. Of course you are. What are you talking about? Well, I
And
want to
Notre
thank
Dame
you so
fans,
much.
probably.
I want to thank you very much for being
It was
here.
my pleasure.
I want to thank you for your respect for life, your long service with the church, what you've done with the youth who need direction. I'm going to ask God to bless you, to bless our audience, to bless people out there who support Wordnet, and that's more than just, watching the show. So God bless you. Continue the work. I'll be anxious to see you again. We'll talk more.
Thanks, Jack.
Come back with us next time for more of what you really need to think about. Jack Knight for Wordnet.
In life, we are not alone. We live with and among people. We constantly enter into contact and relationship with others. Some of these relationships are very formal and superficial, but some are very deep and intimate. How do relationships work? We can all easily relate with those relationships that have been wounded, which are sometimes even bleeding. Father Martin Padovani, SVD, has written a book called Healing Wounded Relationships. It is the result of his many years of work as a marriage counselor. He deals with some of the very simple but pertinent topics like communications, listening, intimacy, forgiveness, reconciliation, and dealing with anxiety and fear. And of course, a very practical question: how do you make a marriage work? You will surely be enriched by this book. You should get it for yourself, or maybe get a copy for a relative or a friend. Be blessed by this book and improve your relationships.
Call the number on the screen or email us to get your copy. You can also place your order by visiting our website. Do it today.